amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Do you know who wrote that song? It's really quite ironic. It was the ex-captain of a ship that was bringing black slaves from Africa to North America. The sacred song of some group of people from somewhere in Africa, unknown and anonymous, suffering, treated like animals in the hull of a ship, driven by someone who becomes a Christian and wants to atone for what he's done. If you're listening to me right now and you're a sincere Christian, namaste. I send you love and respect. But I'm sorry, you must see what was done in the name of loving Jesus. And you must face that. And in my opinion, you should say to the world, we are so sorry. We as Christians will never behave that way again. You need to take a vow that you will never do what your ancestors did. Namaste. Welcome to Vedic Vidya. My name is Jeffrey Armstrong, Kavindra Rishi. Vedic Vidya is available exclusively on Citti Media English channel on Sunday nights at 7 p.m. IST. Our topic tonight is why I left Christianity to become a Hindu. Let me begin by saying that I was born in 1946, just between conflicts. And I was born in the Midwest of the United States. You could call it standard white-bread, middle-class family. Nothing terrible, nothing traumatic, just a reasonable family, and I was sent to church once a week because that's what people did. They went to church, normally, unless they were Jewish. They lived in a different community for the most part, so I was raised a Protestant Christian. And everybody was lovely to me. It was a friendly environment. There was no trauma. There was nothing difficult about it. It only began to seem strange when I became old enough to think and start asking questions. And it was my nature, you might have surmised, to think and ask questions. And this, as it turns out, is the poison pill for Christianity. If you just have faith, and if you just do as you're told, the message is reasonable. It was reasonable till I found out that it had been forced upon indigenous cultures all around our planet with violence and force. But in those days, I didn't have any idea about those atrocities. I was just taking it at face value. Reasonable people. But as I started to think, a dilemma arose. I began to ask questions, both of my teachers at school and of my minister at church. And the minister at church was a little irritated by my questions and didn't really have answers. So I started to look around to see who did. And I went to every different religion. I was precocious in this particular way. I went to see a rabbi and I asked him, so tell me about your tradition. I went to see a Catholic and I heard everyone's story. And there was nothing terrible in the story, but there was something I noticed that was very ironic. The supreme being was angry, distant, far away, and supposedly loving, but very little evidence of it, but had sent someone who was very friendly and loving, his son, who was promptly killed by the horrible humans. What an interesting paradox. So it began to seem to me that his father was someone you couldn't talk to. And the son, well, let me give you an example. This happened later. But eventually, we used to sing a song in church. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Do you know who wrote that song? It's really quite ironic. It was the ex-captain of a ship that was bringing black slaves from Africa to North America. And he converted eventually to Christianity, was very sorry for what he had done, and wrote this song. And when I went to church, that's all I knew. I didn't even know that, really. I just heard the song, and it was a good song. I liked the melody, and it had friendly words. So you see, on one level, there's nothing wrong with Christianity, but here's what I found out later. I saw a video with a beautiful black man singer who sang that song for us. And then he said, "Do you know where it comes from?" And I didn't. Methodist Church, Presbyterian Church? No, he says. The words were written by the captain of the ship when he became a Christian. But the melody was hummed by the Africans who were miserable and being tortured by being in the belly of the ship on a horrible journey to North America, where they were to be enslaved as the property of Christians. Ah, 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 ah. The sacred song of some group of people from somewhere in Africa, unknown and anonymous, suffering, treated like animals in the hull of a ship, driven by someone who becomes a Christian and wants to atone for what he's done, steals their melody and puts it on a song. Do you see the irony? This is the irony of Christianity. It's mostly practiced by sincere people because Jesus talks about loving. It's mostly practiced by people who talk about loving. And as my studies went on, I found out, but they had not behaved in a loving way. There's a fundamental paradox, which I now see in all of the religions who went out in the world with violence and aggression in the name of love. The younger I was, the less I entirely understood this, but when I went to university and began to study history, then I truly understood. And the other thing I saw was that Christianity was one of the religions who burned libraries and destroyed the paraphernalia of worship for other cultures. Any deity, any statue, any object, any altar that wasn't to their tradition, they would destroy it. So gradually I began to see something that William Blake said very clearly, the poet William Blake, who called the Christian God mean old nobody, that angry father in the sky. What's not to like in Jesus, except he's a little wimpy perhaps, but he doesn't fight for the truth. He doesn't want anyone to fight. Well, at least that's loving. But then what is with fighting all the wars? And remember, I grew up after World War II. I watched Vietnam in horror. And you know, we were doing that in the name of God. In the name of God, I think it was called carpet bombing. Now, this was by the time of the 60s. Now I saw it clearly. We were carpet bombing women and children and innocent people and saying, God bless America. And I am saying to myself, something is terribly wrong. So if you're listening to me right now and you're a sincere Christian, namaste. I send you love and respect. But I'm sorry, you must see what was done in the name of loving Jesus. And you must face that. And in my opinion, you should say to the world, we are so sorry. We as Christians will never behave that way again. You need to take a vow that you will never do what your ancestors did. Because the amount of bloodshed that the Christian religion has in its history, and library burning and persecution, inquisitions, is actually just a horror story. But I refuse, because I know better, to say that that is the nature of the religion. But here's what I found out that turned me toward the Vedic culture and made me become a Hindu. Do you know what at the core of these traditions that only have one lifetime is they're all fear-based. All three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are fear-based. They are not knowledge-based. They had a prophet. They had some information that's true, some truth about life and the Supreme Being. And yet, they had only one lifetime, and they were adverse, especially Islam and Christianity, to libraries. They were library burners with a prophet talking of love, and only one lifetime. You see, these are the missing vitamins in Western civilization. In fact, around the world right now, in the many places where people are not philosophical. So I began to see, and then read, books like the Bhagavad Gita. I began to see that in the Vedic Hindu version of this story, the Supreme Being came to earth as an avatar. Avatara means to descend to planet Earth, stay a long time. This is the Supreme Being. This is named in Sanskrit Bhagavan. Bhagavan Sri Ram. Bhagavan Sri Krishna. They are avatars. They are avatars, descents of the one Supreme Being who came to earth to associate with the humans, explain the reality of ultimate truth philosophically, give methods of practice, and teach everyone to respect one another as immortal beings on a long, long journey of learning. This is the Hindu worldview. What I finally came to know is the term for that is Mahatma, one who sees the big picture. Atma means the immortal being that we are, each one of us. You're all, I'm an Atma. That word means we cannot die. We were never created. We cannot end, but we are here of our own volition visiting the realms of matter. That is what this means, namaste. This namaste culture, therefore, was instructed by the avatars who descended to study matter very carefully so that they could cooperate with the laws of nature, so that everyone in society would have enough to eat, would be educated if they wanted, would have opportunities, and that each succeeding generation, what we now call ecology, each succeeding generation would have a life, would have a future. In other words, my friends, not only the reverence for every being, not only seeing them in a divine way, but seeing that there's a long journey process going on. When I saw that the Mahatma viewpoint, this large-minded, big-hearted viewpoint, with divine love as the ultimate destination, but with patience for the unfolding of history, and with a wisdom of watchfulness, and one more thing, science. Science as we know it did not come from Western civilization, and it's a clear historical record that Pythagoras and other Greeks went to India and were trained and learned. It's clearly, obviously true to linguists that Latin and Greek came from Sanskrit, and that Sanskrit did not come from another so-called Indo-Aryan language. That was a made-up story at Oxford. But that Sanskrit is the mother language and the most perfect language, and it's the carrier of a book? No. Of a couple of books? No. Of a library, of wisdom, of science, of knowledge, of medicine, of philosophy, of astronomy, of mathematics. All of those subjects are rooted in the Hindu library of knowledge. All of them. And the only reason you don't know that, or others don't know that, is the lack of integrity in academia. And I know because I've spent about 10 years in academia learning what they knew, and thanks for that. Everyone has gifts to give. This isn't a blanket dismissal of the whole of Western civilization. Parts of it are brilliant, amazing. This is a criticism of a core problem. The violence we have seen enacted in the world in the name of technology is because of the impatience of having only one lifetime. It is because of a lack of respect for all living entities. The reason that women's rights and black rights have been a struggle in the last 20 years, what to speak of 100 years, what to speak of thousands of years in Western civilization. They've been a struggle because everyone is not seen in a divine way, because there isn't a male and female divine. There were so many things that I now saw that were present in the Hindu worldview, a gracious acceptance of other beings and their evolution, an affection for all living entities, the plants, the animals, everyone, all part of the family, a long game view of the whole process of life. This is the civilization that is now making a renaissance of development. And if you've read the sacred books of other religions, good start. I have too. But have you read the Vedic library of the Hindu culture? If you have not, don't be critical of what you haven't studied. And if it gives you some homework to do, well, that's life, isn't it? If you really want to know, you have to do your homework. It was 50 years ago that I started my adventure of being a Hindu. I went into an ashram, spent 5 years serving my guru and learning. I had a succession of gurus and teachers, one who taught me Jyotish, Vedic astrology, the ancient system of mathematics and astronomy from India. I had another teacher who taught me Sanskrit. That teacher had memorized the 4,000 grammatical rules of the Sanskrit language, which has 50 letters in its alphabet. How many does English have? 26. Hebrew, 22. This is the grandmother language of our planet. So becoming a Hindu is not a religious conversion. I didn't convert to another religion because it's called a Dharma. What I did was I went from a bachelor's program and a master's program to a PhD program. And I'm inviting you to do the same thing. And it isn't something you join. You need to understand. You cannot join it. You can participate. It's just like being a scientist. You don't join being a scientist. You participate in the scientific method. So this namaste culture, this culture that sees every living entity full of divine potential, this culture that sees the endless love of the Supreme Being coming to earth embodied and being present for 100 years in the presence of other human beings with stories of that loving experience. The Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the many Puranas. So, my dear friends, please do not approach the sacred knowledge of the culture of India with fear. Do not think that it will displace the truths you already have. But it is time that the Abrahamic religions and all people stop using force and destruction to enforce their viewpoint on the world. And what you can be sure of is that we, practitioners of the Hindu Dharma, will approach you this way and not this way. So, with that, namaste, pranams. I bow to the divine being that you truly are and invite you to take another look at the Hindu, Vedic, Sanatana Dharma culture. Vedic Vidya means shining the light of truth. Tune into Vedic Vidya on the Citti English channel Sunday night at 7 o'clock p.m. IST. My name is Kavindra Rishi, Jeffrey Armstrong. See you next time, and have a namaste.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.